Hello everyone. This video is the entirety of my Gblub incidents ranking series paired into one. Enjoy. Starting off in D tier, in 41st we have the Cursed Ocean incident. This is Gblub's third incident, and currently has over 1 million views, which is insane when you think about it. Anyways, the reason why this incident is last is because it was the most forgettable to me, and honestly I didn't even remember this existed until I had the idea to make this ranking. The story is pretty basic. A rescue is sent out to go look for a missing person in the ocean. The continuity is pretty off here, but it doesn't distract from the overall point. The incident itself is good, it's just nothing that I hadn't already seen before in some form. The only interesting part to me is the ending, for obvious reasons. Next up, in 40th, we have the elevator incident. This one is pretty much in the same boat as Cursed Ocean. It's just that this one had a better story build-up and at the very least, was a bit relatable during the beginning. Anyways, the incident itself is alright. When I first watched this, I never understood who the shadow people were, so I found this incident very confusing. Overall a solid watch. The thing about it is that if you haven't watched any of Gblub's past incidents, then this won't make very much sense. Now, in 39th, we have the False Creatures incident. The story is pretty simple. Basically a guy wants to go to a concert with his friend. On the night of, he calls his father only for him to be at work. Then, his father magically pulls up. As the guy is driving with his father, he soon realizes that creature is not his father and ends up dying because of it. In my opinion, the story development in the beginning was really nice. However, the ending was pretty sudden and like I've said before, something I've already seen. But I guess it isn't fair to critique an incident like this since it's not Gblub's fault that troll incidents are as unoriginal as the average Twitter user. In 38th, we have the rat incident. This one is pretty funny, to me at least. This incident is one of those that goes from 0 to 100 in an instant. Apart from the guy chasing the rat and the ending, nothing else was really interesting or notable. Honestly, it feels like Gblub made this incident in crunch time, but that's just me. In 37th, we have the injection incident. Honestly, despite this being one of Gblub's first incidents, its story at the time was pretty original, and relatively flowed well for being one of the first from a young creator. The only real thing I didn't really like is when the guy injects himself. I get that the sequence was most likely based off of other incidents, but still, that whole segment just dragged. Doesn't distract from the fact that this is still a really well-made incident. In 36th, we have the barber incident. This incident reminded me of when I used to get haircuts as a kid. The barber was really scary to me because he had a really deep voice and didn't talk a lot. But, anyways, the incident is pretty decent. This one in particular just didn't sit right with me, because of how quick the climax happened. Regardless, it's still a good incident that holds up today. In 35th, we have the disguised killer incident. A classic for the ages. As being the first incident Gblub ever made, the actual trollge inspired many other incidents to be created. But then again, as being the first, the incident build-up is quick as ever, and randomly slows down towards the end. But at the very least, I was able to understand what was happening. As low as this incident is, if it had a better execution, it would most likely top the B tier at most. In 34th, we have the birthday incident. Now this is where some of my favorites start appearing. The guy picking out his clothes is one of the most funniest parts of an incident I've seen. It reminded me a lot of Dopey incidents, which is funny because around the time this incident was created, Dopey started his incident making. Anyways, one thing that was really confusing to me is how the creature at the beginning goes completely disregarded until the end, effectively rendering it irrelevant. The ending was so out of nowhere, but the build-up was significantly better than the lower rankings, so that's why it's here. And now to end off D tier. In 33rd we have the Corrupted World incident, or the wrong world if you want to be a smartass. This one barely got placed over the birthday incident. The reason why is because this is one of the few incidents that has a story that doesn't feel rushed or slowed. It runs at a near-perfect pace. The ending also isn't rushed as heck, and the build-up is pretty decent. If only all incidents were like this one. We should be grateful that creators like Gblub are still around, because very few can make incidents that are actually original like him. To start off, in 32nd, we have the Retribution incident. A decent one to start off. This is your typical bullied kid turned mad story, but with some obvious changes. One thing that this incident highlights is how a trollge can go completely rogue and ignore the narrator, which is a pretty original concept that not many creators do. Apart from the sequences being a bit too long, this is a very good incident. This is also the first incident that correctly introduces the culprit, which is a nice touch. In 31st, we have the regret incident. The name speaks for itself. A kid tries to buy a cheap game system from a shady seller, only for it to be a sham and as a result gets full boxed. If only he had known that cheap things don't exist in this economy anymore. Anyways, I'm quite surprised that the kid didn't find it weird that the seller wanted to meet at 2 AM out of all times, but hey, it's just an incident. Don't really have any issues with this one, but nothing original really happened here, so I guess that counts. In 30th, we have the Beneath the Surface incident. A pretty standard incident, but the build-up is great. The suspense of what was happening behind the door had me clung to my chair, or in real terms, my bed. Out of all the things that I could criticize on, the one in particular doesn't have to do with anything regarding the creation, but rather, the actual character. How the guy didn't outrun his boss is beyond me. It reminded me too much of those horror movies where the victims are as dumb and slow as a bag of rocks. Figuratively and literally. In 29, we have the distorted face incident. Another solid one. Why the milk would be in the basement with that long-ass stairwell is one of the wonders of the world. Honestly, this incident was more funny to me than most, because of how much the continuity doesn't make sense. It's not even bad in any way, just why does a normal size home have a stairwell that's probably the length of a hotel one? I get that the images don't necessarily matter, but it's still pretty funny. In 28th, we have the psychopath incident. The narrator was honestly on a mission to distract from the main plot. Or, was he? Anyways, the build-up is just a bit too long. Yeah, that's all I really have. I really did like how this incident was connected to the possession incident, one that won't be seen until late in the series. Nice work Gblub. In 27th, we have the shower incident. The chronically online basement goblins just shook a little. LMAO. I have a bit of a soft side for this one, mainly because of the jokes and the ending. Very well made. However, the thing that confused me is why the kid didn't think sooner that his mom being in the shower for 2 hours was weird. Kind of a stretch, but this is an unserious ranking, so it's not at all a big deal. In 26th, we have the Forbidden Basement incident, Gblub's second ever incident. The reason why this one is so high is because this was the start of what I like to call the culprit phase. Now obviously, this incident has its downsides. I don't think I have to state what they are, but they don't affect the story at all. Honestly, the story was the reason why this incident is ranked so high. Apart from the long-ass ending, this is a good one. And now to cap off the C ranking, in 25th, we have the Despair incident. A truly deep one once you know about the inspiration. When I first watched this incident, I didn't know what the last quote meant. However, one day I watched this incident in a Discord call with one of my friends, who knew instantly what the quote was from. For the sake of you guys' sanctity, I won't say where it's from. If you are a kid, I do not advise searching up the origin, because the story is pretty bad, and I mean really. Gblub did an excellent job at executing the story in a fashion that was similar but for a different reason. A masterpiece is what this is. To begin, in 24th, we have the 2023 New Year incident. Personally, Gblub's New Year videos are my #1 favorite type of incidents. If you haven't watched them, they're basically a collage of many other incidents brought together. They use an element from each of them to build a rocket that is supposed to cause the end of the world. The reason why this one is ranked the way it is because I felt it didn't do a good job at establishing the continuity. I would normally use the "it's a trollge incident" excuse, but most of the time, it didn't make sense how the duo conveniently had access to all of the incident's spots. Like, how did bro encode into the video game? Besides that, an absolute banger. In 23rd, we have the voice reveal incident. Okay, hear me out guys. I get that this technically isn't a real incident, but I will make an exception. It was pretty cool hearing the voice behind these masterpieces, and also was one of the kickers that got me into making incidents, even though I watched this when it first came out, so like 2 years till? I guess the ending counts as an incident, but I think we know this was just to keep Gblub's standard of an incident in check. In 22nd, we have the detective incident. The Barky is such a sick name for an eldritch creature. Its design and abilities are flawless. The incident itself is also good, but one thing did not sit quite right with me. This doesn't have to deal with the structure or execution of the incident, but rather, the actual story. The detective receiving backlash for the actual Barky killing the father and his son does not make sense. What did the detective even have to do with any of that? I guess she was a bit responsible for probably making people curious, and as a result, attempt to replicate her action, but it's not like that doesn't happen all the time with different topics. But, I can say, that this falls under the "it's just a trollge incident" excuse. Pretty lazy, I know. Nice incident nonetheless. In 21st, we have the raid incident. This one goes over the typical experience of a cop surveying the Bronx or Detroit. The unstable couples, the trolling kids, the grayscaled creatures with no pupils. Wait, that's not right. LMAO. Anyways, the editing in this one is top-notch. The POV of the cop is pretty convoluted to execute, and in a trollge incident out of all things? Like man, Gblub is insane. I don't have anything to critic on this one. It's really good, just not one of my favorites. In 20th, we have the Hitman incident. This shows what will happen if a person with a smart mind is left for dead, not the game by the way. This incident has a bit of truth towards it. Many homeless people can't rise up because of issues they face. This leads to them going to the next best option, which is crime. I am not justifying these acts in any way, rather, I am highlighting on what will likely happen if the higher classes don't bring them up. Leveling down the tone a little, the recruiter was really looking out for bro. I respect that. However, this is just as standard as an incident gets, so that's why it's ranked so low. In 19th, we have the Shadow Figures incident. This is another one that I found funny rather than scary. Gblub had stated that he had came up with this incident idea after a nightmare he had, which is genius. The part that was funny to me was the chase scene. The intense music with the fact that the group are running away from their death is so uncalled for. I nearly burst out laughing when I first saw this. This one was pretty repetitive though, so it's pretty mid in terms of the story. It being funny to me is why it's so high. In 18th, we have the simulation incident, one of my personal favorites. The premise of this one is extremely unique. The simulation slowly collapsing and the trollge realizing that the world he lived in wasn't real is pretty freaking cool. And this is quite unusual for me to say, but this incident in particular could have been longer. And I don't mean just adding filler, I mean more development. It would have been great if signs of the simulation falling apart were shown before the trollge noticed. This would have been some quirky irony. And lastly, to finish off the B rankings, in 17th, we have the confession incident. Just put the fries in the bag, is what they used to say. Okay, I'll shut up. This is probably what the average fast food employee has to go through, which obviously excludes the murders. I've probably re-watched this incident over 10 times. I'd watch this while I eat breakfast and lunch. And yes, we content creators do that. Anyways, the ending was too quick for me, and also pretty unsatisfying, since we never got to see the duo get revenge from their rogue wife. I guess at the very least, The boss got what he asked for.
To start off A tier, in 16th we have the restriction incident, one of Gblub's longer and more intriguing incidents. This one not only has top-notch editing, but a well-crafted story and build-up. Probably starting now, I will have little to nothing at all to critique on the incidents, because I like a lot of the higher ranked ones. Anyways, the trollge in this one is an absolute idiot, and honestly made me pissed with the things he did. He costed both himself and his friend their lives, even though the friend technically isn't innocent either. Overall, excellent incident. I hope to see more like these. In 15th, we have the man without love incident, another deep one. This is what happens whenever a guy who only wanted love gets betrayed, and as a result becomes a huge incel and wants to wreak havoc on everyone and everything. This incident is also the first and only one of Gblub's that is a remake, and compared to the original, it miles in comparison to Gblub's, at the time at least. But seriously, murdering an entire nuclear family is insane work. But he has no chill whatsoever. Epic incident. In 14th, we have the prank incident, one of the first incidents I ever watched from Gblub. Honestly, whenever I first saw the ending, I didn't know what it meant at the time. The pranks were pretty funny to me at least. Though this is a pretty standard incident, and technically doesn't have a view death, it being one of the first I saw makes it have some nostalgia points. In 13th, we have the video game Easter egg incident. That sure is a mouthful if I haven't spoken one before. This is also one of the first incidents I ever saw from Gblub. A little fun fact about me, I used to play a ton of FPS games whenever I was younger, and one thing I would look for were Easter eggs, so this incident was very relatable. Though one thing did confuse me, which was how the creature decoded from the game. I may have already gone over something like this, wait I did. Either way, just a standard, short and sweet incident. In 12th, we have the bad choice incident. This is probably how the average solo game developer lives. They can only take so much before they snap. Anyways, this is by far the longest dated incident from Gblub, and it's for a good reason. The story is pretty self-explanatory. The new kid gets picked around, has an extremely rough first day, meets a friend, ends up betraying him, and as a result, kills him and his friends that bullied him. Wait, that's not right. I'm so funny, I know. This incident also one of the few that has the main protagonist be the killer, which is a pretty cool twist. In 11th, we have the 2024 New Year incident. I like this one more than the 2023 New Year incident because of the story. It's almost like a rehashing of the past one, with major improved editing and a consistent continuity. Also, the idea of the emotional clock and the 3D edited rocket is pretty unique. As of the time of me editing, this is Gblub's most recent incident, which certainly did not upset. Now reaching the top 10s, in 10th, we have the possession incident, which in my personal opinion, is Gblub's most recognizable incident, excluding the view count. This incident is nothing less of a masterpiece, especially for the time. Gblub was one of the few creators that made his incidents connect with each other, which is a nice touch. If this were longer, and had more development, I would definitely have it in my top 5. And lastly in A tier, in 9th, we have the lost friend incident, a scary one. The trollge in this incident would end up becoming the disguise killer, which judging by the story, is certainly a type of character development. He just missed his friend, and wanted revenge. Not much else to say about this one. Just a work of art in general.
In 8th, we have the game developer incident. This incident seems to be self-explanatory at first, but then the tone switches immediately. For those who haven't watched this one yet, the story starts in a school classroom, where a group of kids are telling what they want to be when they get older. The answers are simple and looked up upon until the main trollge says that he wants to be a game developer, which makes the class laugh. Because of this, he strives to make his own video game in hopes to regain the class's sympathy, only for it to backfire horribly. This is when the trollge decides that, and I quote, all the laughters will turn into fear, by implementing a logging system into the game that sends a killer to the address of the one that played it, which in this case, is the bully that broke his computer. I will say that while the incident is for the most part basic, this incident is connected to another major incident of Gblub's, which will be talked about later. In 7th, we have the forever asleep incident, a very relatable one, to me at least. To summarize, the trollge arrives home and takes a nap. He then has a dream that is quite interactive. Once he deletes an immobile trollge from the dream, he wakes up, and wants to have the dream again, so he figures out how to lucid dream. He then returns to the dream world, however it soon becomes corrupt. Eventually, he realizes that he is trapped in the dream, and can't wake up, which leads to him being deleted by another trollge, which was likely himself in another universe. I think I speak for most of us when I say that lucid dreaming is one of the most interesting things we can experience. It allows us to have free will in a world where literally anything is possible. Back on the incident, the only thing that was confusing to me was how the trollge had gotten trapped. I assume that the steps he learned on how to lucid dream were botched, but overall, it's a good one. In 6th, we have the witness incident, which as of this recording, is my favorite incident that Gblub made in 2024. A duo is robbing a store, and once they get away, one of the trollges are confronted by a girl who is likely suspicious of him. Throughout the incident, he sees the girl multiple times, which leads to certain points of awkwardness between them. The duo decide to rob another store, but this time, the girl had witnesses them walking out. As fears grew of them being caught, they decide to craft a plan to kill the girl, which at first backfired, but them succeeded in a way that I certainly did not think of. Man, the girl being very pressing to the trollge is likely why they were caught. If the trollge had just complied, or at the very least, killed her there, they wouldn't have had the issue. Still, this incident is pretty much the representation that someone is always watching, even when you think otherwise. Excellent incident. In 5th, we have the culprit incident, which in itself is too content-filled for me to consider it an incident, but rather, a movie. This incident is way too long for me to make a summary of it, so instead I will say why this is the most important incident of Gblub's to date. The culprit, or in the incident's terms, the Seeprit, is the main connoisseur of incidents, and is the reason why they all happen. He is the one behind the narrator's voice, even mine, which, I should probably state that I am not at all related to the Seeprit. He's the cause of all the chaos throughout the world, and after being held captive manages to escape on his own terms. Until we get the second episode of this series, we won't know what happened to him, so hopefully the next incident that Gblub is currently making is such. The only critique that I have is that despite the incident being 30 minutes long, only about 12 to 15 minutes of it are actually important. In 4th, we have the school trip incident, which is Gblub's most viewed incident as of this ranking, with over 2.3 million views. The disguised killer makes a return in this one. There isn't really much to summarize that the name, school trip, doesn't already give away, so I will skip to the part where the two trollges explore the forest. Once again, the main trollge in this one is an absolute imbecile, and killed himself and Nerd Troll. The fact that Nerd Troll actually fended off the disguised killer himself shows how much of a wuss the main trollge truly is. The ending is really sad, which shows how well executed this incident is. It's also pretty funny, so the amount of attention that this one has is not for no reason. Now to start the podium, in 3rd, we have the trick or treat incident, which is the incident I have rewatched the most from Gblub. Similarly to the school trip incident, the name gives away majority of the plot, so I will only explain the parts that aren't as expected. The part where the girl pulls out the gun is just out of pocket. I assume that she was at most a young teenager, and yet has a gun. Holy guacamole. Another part is when the girl's costume goes unnoticed, while her brother, who isn't wearing a costume, gets praised for wearing one, which basically means that they are calling him scary looking, which is a bit weird. Also, the dad is a real one in this incident. The story and dialogue are so perfectly crafted in this one, I have absolutely nothing to say other than it being a masterpiece. In 2nd, we have the lurker incident. Guys, take this with a grain of salt, but, this incident to me, is the best incident that Gblub has made in terms of development. The dialogue is crafted to perfection. The mom and trollge having a dynamic that is pretty resembling to some kids in the world is very apparent. This one is so good, that I can't even put it into a large amount of words why it is, but that's just me. If you want laughs but also want to be scared, then I recommend watching this one if you haven't already. And lastly, to claim the crown. In first, we have the 2022 New Year incident. This is not only the first incident I ever watched from Gblub, but it is also my favorite. I watched this when it first came out, and was the incident that got me into watching trollge incidents. Now, obviously, since it's my favorite, I don't think I need to explain why I do, since I've basically stated what an incident needs to have in order for it to be considered good to me. What this incident does right compared to the other New Year ones is that there are more incidents referenced compared to just 3. While I probably am just blinded by nostalgia, my view of this being my favorite will likely never, and I mean, never, change. That is the end of this compilation. If you liked this, then make sure to like and subscribe for more.